Less is more. Now you've probably heard this phrase once or twice. It was popularised by German-American architect Mies Van Der Rohe, highly influential in the Modernist movement in the 1950s. During my time in architecture school, I was really drawn to this idea and often implemented this into my own design studio projects. And while those modernist buildings were influential in the early days, I resonated more with the approach of Japanese minimalist architects. The way that they would use space to their advantage, forms that were expressive, they used a very limited material palette, the way that they would use light and shadow, and also a very strong connection to garden and landscape. And all of this would sort of come together and bring together an interior that brought a sense of calmness. So while a lot of minimalist houses will look different from one another, they share very similar traits and design elements. So while we're using phrases that were popularised during the modernist movement, another one to think of is form follows function, where the purpose of the building should be the starting point of the design. When looking at this from a house scale, you don't want to come up with some funky layout and then proceed to place rooms and furniture inside of that, because what you'll end up having is a lot of dead and wasted space. So what you want to do is design with function in mind first, and let that dictate the form and shape of the building. So while you could argue that a glass cube is probably the most minimalist thing you could do, it isn't very practical at all, like at all, because you have to deal with a lot of heat load, heat loss, and very awkward rooms and space. Now when you think of minimalism, probably the first thing that pops into your mind is that all-white monochromatic material palette. And this is done for a reason. If you have too many colours and textures, the space becomes cluttered and visually distracting. And while there isn't a hard and fast rule that dictates exactly how many different materials and colours can be used, just keep thinking back to less is more. And it doesn't have to be just whites, beiges and greys. Timbers and stone can provide a lot of warmth and texture to the home. Glass is another strong material to use, whether it's for a curtain wall to bathe the interior with as much light as possible, or be used to frame a specific view. How often do you hear people talk about clean lines and you're not entirely sure what it is? If there are clean lines, is there such thing as a dirty line? I don't think so though. So when architects and designers talk about clean lines, it's usually in reference to lines that are unbroken and uninterrupted. A great example of this is at the point where the wall and the ceiling meet, which in a lot of homes usually has some form of plaster cornice installed. Now this is done to effectively cover up any gaps, but what you get is a visual break between the wall and the ceiling, and often than not, lots of smaller lines in that profile detail of the cornice. However, in a lot of minimalist homes, that wall-ceiling junction is met perfectly, without the need for cornice. This means that there's just a small single line around the room. To me, one of the most confusing types of a minimalist house is that 900 square metre mansion that has 12 bathrooms and 9 bedrooms. But it's still regarded as minimalist because it's white, steel, stone, marble, glass, like it has that aesthetic of minimalism. But at its core, minimalism is about removing the excess, such as materials and ornamentation. But it should also strip away excess space. How much space you need will vary depending on your lifestyle, such as a 19-year-old university student probably doesn't need as much space as a family of 4. It isn't necessarily about living in a tiny home, but it really is just about figuring out how much is enough. Like, do you really need those his and her showers in the ensuite? And do you actually need an ensuite? Do you need that extra 3 meters at the end of your bed? Like, what do you do in that space? Like, nothing. I came across this term in architecture school, honesty. And while Webster's dictionary defines honesty as adherence to the facts, in architecture, it is allowing the building to be true to itself. When it comes to materials, it's allowing the material to be expressed and not to be afraid to let the passage of time show. If you absolutely love the look of an interior brick wall, what would you do? Would you hire someone to lay a brick by brick by brick, giving you that texture, that warmth, that richness, that honesty? Or would you just slap up a painted decorative panel that kind of looks like brick? And as a son of a bricklayer, my heart hurts when people decide to go with the latter, especially if it's just a wallpaper that's been slapped up. Prior to modernism, ornamentation was such a prominent feature with many decorative elements. Did it add to the function of the house? Nah. So when you strip it away, the house still functions as it needs. All it does is just removes a visual distraction. By removing that ornamentation and clutter, the rooms in the house now have space to breathe and be. While light and connection to landscape can be found in just about every other architectural style, there is a real beauty where biophilic design can merge with minimalism. This can be done through more natural material selections, visual connections to nature beyond your home, but also bringing the nature in through gardens and indoor plants. The light also plays a huge part, allowing the space to feel larger and brighter, and allowing the passage of time, both daily and seasonally, to be observed. Again, nothing exclusive about this in regards to minimalism, but it's an important factor to really enhance the space. When you break it down, it really is about stripping things down to the bare essentials wherever possible. You can call it minimalism, essentialism, reductionism, but whatever you call it, these elements that I've outlined should not be seen as restrictions. Achieving a minimalist design outcome shouldn't be about checking things off a list or trying to achieve a specific look. But when you implement these design principles, what you create is a home that has a real sense of calmness, clarity, space for what you deem is important, and also gives you space to breathe. So I guess Mies Van Der Rohe was really onto something when he said less is more. Okay. Less is more. Less is more. Less is more. Less is more? Yeah, less is less.